Today's episode of the Gateway Spotlight is sponsored by EF Education First, the world leader in international education. EF Education First partners with higher education institutions and faculty members to develop custom, scalable study abroad programs to help students grow their global competencies. Go to efstudyabroad.com to learn more about their commitment to academic innovation, accessibility, and safety. Thank you so much to EF for sponsoring the Gateway Spotlight. Now let's go to the show.
Welcome to the Gateway Spotlight, a show designed to highlight diverse perspectives, next generation initiatives, emerging trends, and innovative thinkers in the international higher education community. I'm your host, Brooke Roberts, Director of Partner Marketing at Podium Education and a 20-year veteran of the global education profession. Today, we're discussing the changing professional landscape and career shifts taking place in the international higher education field. And I'm very excited to be joined by today's guest, Dr. Sonia Feigenbaum. She is the Senior Vice Provost for Global Engagement and the Chief International Officer at the University of Texas at Austin. She joined UT Austin in 2019 as their inaugural Senior Vice Provost for Global Engagement. And during her tenure, she has led the rebranding of Texas Global to illustrate a broader vision for global engagement at UT and create a comprehensive virtual institutional global presence. She's achieved a lot in her short time at UT Austin, including her division being awarded the prestigious Senator Paul Simon Award. Congrats on that. But before she joined UT, Dr. Feigenbaum was the Associate Vice Chancellor for International Engagement and Global Strategies and the Senior International Officer at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Wow, these titles, they don't give up, do they? They're so long. She earned her undergraduate degree in music performance, the cello, and master's and doctoral degrees in Spanish from Indiana University, Bloomington. She has native fluency in French and Spanish, is proficient in Portuguese, Italian, and Russian. And just to make us all feel like underachievers, she's also currently studying Korean. Welcome to the Gateway Spotlight, Sonia.
Thank you so much, Brooke. Thanks for having me. Thank you to Gateway for developing this wonderful series. And I hope that we will have a productive conversation that will in some way highlight and support our colleagues across the US and globally. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to meet you. I've never had the pleasure to meet you, so it's lovely to get to know you through this venue. And just a great segue into that, I would love for you to share with everyone a little bit about your international education story. How did you find your way into this funny little world of ours in international higher education?
Well, I have to say that it wasn't something that was actually planned. I'm a first generation student, immigrant. My family and we immigrated to the US from France when I was 12 years old. As you said, I was a music major, but I always had a deep interest in foreign languages, and also because I didn't speak any English when I came to the US. I was always fascinated by the ways in which we process language and we process information and we convey that information. So long story short, I segued into Latin American literature, became a professor, worked in academia for several years, and then moved over to the federal government, specifically the National Endowment for the Humanities and the U.S. Department of Education. And in both of those both of these agencies, I really worked to pave the way for internationalization, whether it was for documentary films or public programs, or whether it was working with Title V minority serving institutions, as well as Title VI programs for international foreign language education. And then I decided to return to academia, looking at international education, and made my way from Brown University to Nebraska and then to UT Austin. So it's not something that was necessarily planned. There was some strategy to it, but it was all driven by my passion for really bringing international education to the forefront for all of our students, our staff, and to really support our faculty as best as I could, and to do so with amazing colleagues that I've had throughout my career.
We'll talk about an interesting cultural shift going from Providence, Rhode Island to Nebraska. I grew up in rural Kansas and I went to college in Boston, and I found that to be one of the most challenging intercultural changes I've ever experienced. What was that like for you?
Well, I think what I've experienced is that sadly, in the US, there are divisions created by these geographic differences and really a lack of understanding of the beauty of the fabric of this country. And I was always, especially because of my experience in Indiana, I was always drawn to understanding those differences, cultural differences, and seeing what the nuances were like. And so I think being in international education, I would be remiss not to be open to these experiences and to really want to know people for who they are despite of where they were born, and to not be judgmental about where they're coming from. And so for me, it's been a wonderful, really rich experience, whether it's been the Northeast or the Midwest or the Plains or now the Southwest. It's really wonderful, and I'm learning every day. I'm learning how to convey information, how to read the codes, and it's really enlightening. So I think it's really, it aligns with international education very well.
Absolutely. I feel like sometimes we can underestimate just the power of those dynamics, even within the confines of our, national borders. How like you just said, like the quilt and fabric of our country is so varied and diverse and interesting, and something you can learn from. So I love that perspective. So let's dive into our topic today, talking about career shifts. Obviously, from your various roles throughout the field, you've had many opportunities to not only be hired and go through the process as a potential employee, but also hire a lot of people and mentor staff and build organizations and culture inside your divisions that you've led. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how, when we think about the pandemic in global education, we typically think about how it's affected, the mobility of students and programs being grounded, or, the shifting modalities of programs to digital in a lot of cases. But, as a profession, we were also rocked in many, many ways as professionals in this space. We've seen people leave the field. We've seen people be laid off en masse from very, prestigious, respected organizations. We've also seen hiring sprees in the last few years too, at the same time. So I would love for you to sort of help us establish this conversation and kind of a general thesis around what you think have been the biggest shifts you've seen take place in the profession, especially over the last few years as a result of the pandemic.
I think it's really difficult to make a blanket statement on the shifts that have occurred in internationalization because of the diversity of the institutions that are represented, because of the ways in which internationalization is funded or not in the distinct institutions. I can really speak to my experience here and say that the field has definitely demonstrated an ability to move and I'll use the word that's a buzzword, to pivot in times of challenges. We've done that in an agile way. I think part of the issue was to really demonstrate to our colleagues who are not in internationalization that even though there was no student mobility, there was so much to be done. There was so much activity that we could actually catch up on, that oftentimes we didn't have the opportunity to catch up on, such as making sure that our partnerships were the right partnerships, really create strategies that would focus on sustainability, understand how our partners abroad were functioning, and how their governments or their institutions were supporting them. I think there was a lot of time to reflect, a lot of time to, I think, be empathetic and compassionate with our teams and our leaders, and to try to navigate really difficult waters in a way that would really demonstrate that we cared about our staff and that we were there for them, and that we were trying to do everything we could in our power not to terminate positions, not to eliminate positions. We did that really successfully. It was many days of sleepless nights because we had to plan from a financial perspective, and also to plan strategically for the return, and to know that, I think more philosophically, life is really a roller coaster, and whenever you're going in the dips, you know that you are going to come back up. And so our vision was to think, this is a difficult moment for international education, but we will be back. And we had seen that with many other instances in the field, whether it was Ebola, whether it was 9/11. I mean, there were all sorts of things beyond our control that have affected the field. And so I think for those of us who had been here, had been in academia or in the periphery of academia, it was important to really keep that vision and to make decisions accordingly, while also balancing our budgets.
Right. Yeah. I think you brought up an interesting point about sort of convincing the greater institutional landscape and community that the global office, if you will, is more than just moving people around the world. And it requires a little bit of a rebrand, almost, just to say, we don't just send or receive students. We do so much more to help bring a fabric and a layer of global awareness, whatever you're calling it at your institution, beyond just mobility-based programs. So I think we're kind of going through that internally as a field too, even post-pandemic, of sort of saying, okay, we tried to rebrand and say all of these things are part of what we do, not just the mobility piece. And now that travel is back and mobility is back, how are we maintaining that brand of we are more than just mobility? I know this is way off topic from what we talked about, but I think I'd be interested to hear your perspective on that, of how you are maintaining this new expanded brand of what global learning is at UT Austin.
Well, I think in order to answer this question, we need to go back to pre-pandemic and when I arrived at UT, working with a phenomenal team of colleagues. And I think that's really important to highlight the fact that you cannot have great leadership if you don't have teams that are really committed and that are passionate about the work that we're doing. But one of the ways that we did this, I always believed that there was a misunderstanding as to what internationalization is on some campuses. It's not that it's not supported, it is absolutely supported, but it's not about the international office per se has been, I think, mislabeled, and it's been mislabeled by the very people that lead them oftentimes. We are the engine that allows the university to advance internationalization. And by being that engine, we do provide services and we do provide experiences to our students and to our faculty and to our colleagues at the institution. And that does go beyond student mobility. And the only way to demonstrate that was really to map. And to map internationalization on a campus that has 51,000 students with, several thousands of faculty members, with partnerships that were in certain areas of the institution and not in other areas. I think bringing all that together and telling the story has been really, really important in being able to move internationalization forward and to embrace the challenges that came with the pandemic. And that's what we did. We were, in a way, we were paving the way for any kind of unfortunate circumstance that was going to happen, but we didn't know that we were doing that. We were doing it because we were at a time in the institution where there was renewal, where there was this inaugural position that had been created, and where we were ready for the next chapter of our existence. And so that's the way that we essentially thought about sustainability and so forth. And I think that's what allowed us to move forward and to demonstrate to the campus and to the broader community that global engagement is everything. And that's how we launched our first global engagement report, biannual. We're about to launch the next one that will be up on our website and sent over to our distinct stakeholders in a couple of weeks for the 2020 to 2022. So I think that the importance of telling the story shouldn't be underestimated for an entire institution.
Yeah, and I think that is really important because, like you mentioned, every institution is so dramatically different, and you sit in a position where you have this wonderful sort of overarching view of all of UT Austin, whereas obviously some institutions that's very disparate and disconnected, and there's no overarching place. But I think still, even if that's for those listening, if that's your situation where there's not that umbrella place to sort of coalesce all of this information, you can still do it within your world, and seeing how you're mapping the different programming and different initiatives you've launched or would like to launch in your world, and maybe eventually that can grow at your campus. So don't despair if you don't have Sonia's setup. Please be empowered here. But I have to tell you though
that I have been in the other seats where things are decentralized. And I would say you are absolutely right. Do not despair, and always think of what it is that you can do within the framework within which you sit. And you can really advance any institution when it comes to internationalization. So my advice would be to really think about the relationships that you have across campus, build those relationships, and tell the story together, and really prop each other up and prop the various stakeholders up that are in your institution, in order to really demonstrate that really there's one common goal. How is your institution globally engaged, and how does that help its profile?
Yeah, it's great advice. So I want to start diving into some specific categories, if you will, of topics around sort of the larger career discussion and how we work in international education nowadays. And the first area I want to talk about remote work. I think everyone would kind of agree in our field. We never thought higher education would be a place where we'd say, oh yeah, work from home a few days a week or all the time. And obviously the pandemic launched everyone into this remote work world. I'm curious, what is the status now at UT Austin when it comes to remote work? Do you have specific policies? How are you leveraging it in different capacities? And I know we're going to talk about recruitment later, but are you using it as a recruitment tool? I'd be really curious what your philosophy is around remote work, or as an institution or office.
Sure. Well, I'll begin by saying, going back to what I was saying earlier about paving the way without knowing it. I've always been a very strong advocate of remote work, even as far back as when I was in the government. I was one of the individuals who really, really said, look, people don't need to sit at their desk just to sit at their desk. We need to look at things more deeply and understand what the responsibilities of the roles are. So as a result, we did have remote work prior to the pandemic. But obviously, the remote work that ensued during the pandemic and now is a little bit distinct, because with an organization of over 150 staff members that really is focused on serving all of our stakeholders across campus and beyond, we need to think about the service that requires face-to-face engagement. And we need to also be lockstep with how the pandemic has impacted our stakeholders. For example, our students. Do they feel more comfortable engaging in advising remotely because it's easier on them because of traffic or whatever the case may be, or because of their schedules? How do we support the diversity of our stakeholders? And so the only way to do that is really to think not as like from a blanket perspective, but to say, yes, hybrid work is supported at Texas Global, and it is supported as long as your role doesn't require to be here in the office every single day for face-to-face meetings and so forth. So that I think has been a recruitment tool, but it's really representative of what is I think the job market today, especially in a growing city like Austin. And it's really to try to support our staff in helping them balance, achieving work-life balance. But there's also, there's that silver lining, but there's the counterpart, and the counterpart is helping each other. Because I'm one of those victims, to really be able to draw the boundaries of, you are working from home, but what does that mean? And what does it mean when you're going to the office, and how does this affect relationships, and how important is our face-to-face meetings? And so I think striking that balance is really important, and our leadership here and our colleagues at Texas Global are very aware of that, and there's constant conversation about how to evolve either in one direction or in the other. But right now, I think we're pretty clear that hybrid work, unless your position really requires you to be here for the entire week, is the way that we're functioning.
Mm-hmm. Is that a policy or an approach that's adopted across the entire campus, or is your unit unique in this way?
So the campus has essentially said we are open to remote work, but you as leaders of various entities and units across campus should really look at your functions and see what is best for your organization, keeping in mind that we are a university. Right. We are here to serve not only our students and our faculty, but also the public. And the core of our activities needs to be respected and needs to be taken forward, while also understanding that the use of technology can be very positive.
Yeah. Well, I would love to stay on just talking about remote work this entire time, because that's something I'm very passionate about. I've also been working remotely for, 15 years now in various roles. And so for me, it wasn't kind of a new shift, but I know for a lot of people it was. And I, like you, I think the whole idea of people sort of having to check into an office, like a time card almost, just, I guess, to keep tabs on them. It's so strange. It just is a very archaic way of thinking about work. So I would love to keep talking about this. And if we have time, maybe we'll come back to it. But we have several other subjects we wanted to dive into. And I wanted to talk, I think people will be interested to hear more about how you're going about recruitment and filling vacant roles. I know I've talked to a lot of friends in leadership roles around the country who, they have a lot of positions to fill. They're having a really hard time getting qualified candidates. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about, your approach to recruitment and finding those talented people who can be, a great asset to your team, and then also, who can learn a lot from joining your organization.
Sure. Well, first of all, our philosophy is we want you to come to UT Austin. We want you to come to Texas Global. We will take care of you, but we also understand that if you're interested in a career progression that is beyond what Texas Global can offer, we will support you in following your dreams, your goals, your aspirations. That being said, as well as everybody, that the Great Resignation was a very real wave, that it was not just in academia, that it was not just in international education, and that I think in many ways it was a healthy way for the world to be self-reflective about what we wanted to do, who we wanted to be, and what our passion and our goals were. And we have an organization that is very diverse in all sense of the word. And so as a result of that, when we're thinking of recruitment, we're thinking of obviously hybrid work. We're thinking of retaining professional staff by providing professional development opportunities. We're also thinking about, one of the things that I did coming in within a year or so was to really look at the landscape within Texas Global and see whether there was any career progression within units. I'm a real believer, and maybe it's because that's how my brain functions, in sort of learning different things at different times in your life, and piling these things on so that you can create a I think, you know, maybe a tableau of that shows nuance in your understanding of international education. And so as a result, you know, the broader vision is, how could we have colleagues that can speak about, that know education abroad programming, but that also know protocols for hosting delegations and know how to work with alumni and so forth. And so what mechanisms are there to allow them to learn and to shift from one unit to another? So we've seen some people who have taken opportunities across Texas Global. We've also seen colleagues who have been able to go up the ladder in Texas Global because we created these various steps. But that's not always enough. You know, any organization has a finite number of senior management, and so as a result, there is this there is this chance that you know, we will have colleagues that will depart, and when we do, we want them to look fondly on their experiences at UT Austin. So I think that it's been challenging. It was challenging about 6 months ago, because a lot of the institutions that had terminated positions started to rehire. We were fortunate we didn't have to do that. Although because of the Great Resignation, people did reevaluate where they wanted to live, if they wanted to be closer to family or friends. And so the more junior positions, I think, gave some thought to their career path, and some of them did leave. And so we've had an opportunity to bring on new colleagues. But I would say that now things are leveling off. We are recruiting. Our pool of applicants is starting to grow exponentially, and we're having applicants that are extremely strong and that are making it very difficult for us to make decisions, hiring decisions. So you know, part of my problem is that no matter what, I'm a true optimist.
I can tell.
And I do think that there are reasons why we're in certain places at certain times in our lives, and I sort of think about that for the colleagues that I work with, and sort of embrace, you know, what their choices are, and see how we can be helpful and having everybody grow and spread their wings, whether it's here or at another institution or in another field.
I'm curious. It's related, but it's slightly off topic. You know, I've spent 10 years of my career coaching aspiring sort of young international educators trying to break in or just level up their career at the early stages. And I have very strong opinions about our requirements for entry-level jobs, our pay scales, I mean, in higher education generally, but we're talking about international ed. I'm curious if any of these things, the Great Resignation or the challenges of hiring or the uncertainty of, you know, even your funding and budget, if it has, you know, forced or encouraged you and your team to reevaluate what you're asking of especially entry-level employees and how we're compensating people in our field.
So this is a two-part question. Let me just say that compensation was very important to me even when I came to UT and looked at the landscape, and we were very fortunate to be able to support our teams to receive increased compensation right coming out of the pandemic, and so in the last year, and our compensation levels are fairly strong. In terms of our entry-level positions, I think for us, the requirement of the entry-level position really varies according to the units in which you are going to apply. It is true, and I have to say that I'm one of these individuals who believes that international experience is really important, but also the disposition of the individual is really important. They desire to learn, the ability to represent an institution across different cultures. And if one doesn't have that experience yet, really the desire to acquire that is really important.
Mhm.
So we are, I think when you have 9 or 10 units, it's difficult for me to make a blanket statement other than we are very cognizant of also individuals who are wanting to break into the internationalization field and who are highly qualified, but have never have master's degrees, PhDs, and they've never been able to break in because they can't break in at the entry level. So I think it's a really complex ecosystem.
Absolutely.
And I think one needs to be responsive to that, but one also needs to think, what is it that I want my organization to do, and how do I take the institution forward, and what does that look like, individual by individual. So
well, related to this idea of recruitment, I'm curious what has been your approach or just philosophy around DEI from a professional level. We talk about access and equity for student participation in international learning and global learning, but there's also an elephant in the room about the diversity of our field as professionals. And I'm curious, what do you have an approach or something that you're very cognizant about how you approach recruiting and nurturing talent from more diverse backgrounds?
Sure. I'm really glad you're asking this question, because I think it's not really an elephant. It's not just an elephant in the room in terms of the diversity of our field. We have a very diverse set of colleagues here at Texas Global, but we have our strategic plan that was just launched by our president's vision is very bold and wonderful, and it's a strategic plan that I really I find aspirational and really phenomenal in terms of the human component, where the strategic plan has created a plan for an equitable and inclusive environment, where we have a document called "You Belong Here." So by virtue of who we are, we hire diverse staff. And by diverse staff, I mean the different types of diversity with international backgrounds and experiences, different socioeconomic backgrounds, linguistic. I mean, it really, we had a retreat a few months ago, and it was about diversity and inclusion over at Texas Global for the leadership. And one of the things that was really interesting is, you may not think that you're diverse, but you really are. As a group, you don't know a lot of things about your colleagues. But for me, the elephant in the room is not the fact that you hire and that you are coexisting. It's the fact that there is difference amongst us in the ways, and I alluded to that, in the ways we communicate with each other. Our linguistic and cultural backgrounds really influence who we are, how we deliver information. And while we say we want to be diverse, we need to be really cognizant of the fact that with that diversity comes the need for acceptance. It's not just inclusivity, it's acceptance of the fact that my delivery style will be very different from yours, and that we may have a disagreement, or we may always be in agreement. But that, I think, need to understand the complexity of the communication is really important. And we think about this a lot when we recruit and hire. We're looking for candidates that can bring new skills to the team, that have multilinguistic abilities and diverse life experiences. that can be applied to the work of Texas Global. So we approach our hiring holistically, and in most cases, we have been really successful in creating that diverse applicant pool as hiring a diverse team.
Yeah, those are. Sorry, go ahead.
I feel really fortunate that we are in a position where, I mean, we're in a field where we can do that. And it's been really wonderful for that very reason, right?
Yeah. Well, I think this is a great segue to talk now about the interesting things you've been doing to not just obviously recruit great talent to your organization, but also to motivate and retain staff, especially during very tumultuous times, which, pretty much is life, right? But also, we can't ignore the last few years, how sort of unnerving they've been for everyone. I'm curious, how do you approach motivating and supporting your team, especially, thinking about even going back to this remote work question, that they're working, hybrid, remote, asynchronous, and how you're supporting them as a team culturally within your unit, but also looking at their career trajectory and how you can support them on their path, wherever that might lead.
Well, so I'll talk about the practical, which is that we have competitive salaries. We have the flexible work arrangements that we talked about. We really deliver a clear, consistent. We have consistent, clear, and compelling career tracks and leadership paths within the organization that is going to propel staff and their journeys. We define, offer, and enhance meaningful professional development, training, advising, mentorship opportunities to the staff so that it fosters career growth, leadership, and skill development.
Can I ask about that? Because I would love to hear an example, only because these are the kinds of things that I feel like at a lot of institutions, it's like a paper perk. It's listed, but it's not truly encouraged at some institutions. So they say, oh, you get all these things, but when people try to use it, it's sort of looked at negatively. I'm curious how you foster people to actually utilize these resources and support them, and sort of saying, no, please go utilize these things. How do you make sure it's a reality?
So first thing is, I mean, I'll give you an example. Every person that joins Texas Global has an automatic membership to the Global Leadership League.
Oh, great.
Which is a really wonderful organization for women and their allies in the field. It has amazing opportunities, and I know that our colleagues and myself take advantage of that. The second thing is travel to local and domestic conferences is part of the experience. Another one is we do have colleagues who have aspirational goals of going back to school and doing a master's degree or a PhD, and we support them as long as we know that there's not going to be a negative impact on the work that needs to be done. I'm in the midst of creating, and we already have this, but I'm expanding this, creating opportunities for our staff to go and spend time abroad in other international offices at partner institutions, and for us to receive our colleagues from other offices abroad. And so we're going to be doing this with Korea. We do that with Mexico. We're going to probably be doing this with Taiwan. So these are opportunities that I think some institutions do, others don't. And so that's another opportunity. That's another example. I can think of, let's see what else. We've had colleagues who were in one unit and then applied, because we're very stringent on the idea that you must, the position that you have is the one that you've earned. You worked hard to get it. We don't just promote internally. We really make sure that everyone applies for the role, whatever role is available. And so we have had some instances where we've had colleagues who have gone from one unit that's somewhat unrelated to the other unit that they're moving to, and they have really changed the career path within internationalization.
Mm-hmm.
Could have been from communications, marketing communications, over to alumni relations, where we created a brand new global alumni relations unit. And that is somewhat a change of path for your career. And so we provide all of the training that you may need in order to take on your new responsibilities and role. So I think what we're doing is we're, to summarize it, we're open to situations and we're thoughtful about how we go, whether we approve, a request or not, because at the end of all of this, we need to get the work done, but we also are very cognizant of the fact that our staff's happiness and growth is really key to moving forward, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, our last topic that I wanted to talk about, it's a little fun. I think it's a little lighter than some of these others, but I want to talk about generational changes. So I had to look this up before we got on here, and I looked it up, and the oldest Gen Zs, right? The oldest Gen Zs right now are 27 years old. They were born in 1995, which kind of blew my mind. In my mind, I picture Gen Z as like high schoolers, or a little younger, but no, they're 27. I mean, they can rent a car without additional fees. It's crazy to me. And then when we think about the other end of our profession, age-wise, I mean, I have colleagues and know great people are in their late 60s, early 70s, meaning they were born in the late 40s, early 50s. And so we have this wide swath of generations represented in our field. And, but it's not just that wide swath of ages, it's also just like their life lived experience. And when it comes to technology, but also the ebbs and flow of the economy. I mean, all the things that these different groups of experience. I'm curious what your experience has been like at UT Austin, if you've seen this, if you have some younger staff, but also work with colleagues or maybe fellow faculty or something that represent more of that older demographic, and what that dynamic has been like, if it's been a positive thing, challenging, what challenges have arose from this? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so I've experienced this both as being the youngest person in a work environment, and now being far from being the youngest person.
No. We're still young. We're still young and cool. It's fine.
and well, that's the thing is, and I thought a lot about that, about the ways in which various generations convey information or what their expectations are. And I'm seeing that I think that the pandemic, the environmental and health crisis in people's home countries, the importance of mental health and physical health, the idea of having sandwich generations, people who have younger children and have aging parents, or people who are older with teenagers. I mean, it's really the gamut. And I think that is part of the diversity of an organization, and that is something that needs to be embraced, and that is something that can be challenging. The way I may express myself and say, saying something that I think would have been innocuous for my generation is not innocuous today. I think that the only way to move forward in an environment where things have shifted dramatically is to have honest dialogues, to understand that because there are generational differences, there may be miscommunication, or there may be expectations that are erroneous. For example, one of the expectations may be that there's less of an understanding of hierarchies, and hierarchy does matter. We work in a society and in a world where even though we want to break down those barriers, at times the barriers are there, despite what we want. And there's another component, which is that because we're working in an international context, we need to be hypersensitive to the generational differences within these distinct within the distinct cultures with which we work internationally. So it's really multi-layered. And what we're trying to do organizationally is really think one thing: how do we support you, and how do we embrace this intergenerational engagement? How do we make it fun? So we have a social committee that says, let's go out bowling. That's going to do a Happy Valentine's event. We have, we're trying to create community, especially in light of a hybrid work culture, that will allow us to say, generations each have something really, really important to bring to the table. And learning from younger people is wonderful. And for younger people to learn from more veteran workers and colleagues is instrumental in establishing institutional knowledge and in evolving. So I think I see it again as a positive.
I agree. I work with a lot of young people at Podium, and I always just have to ask myself, like, 20 years ago, when I was just starting in my career, what would I have wanted from the person who's been in the field for 20 years and try to, play that role that maybe I didn't have or had, a few great examples of early in my career, and to sort of put that hat on again. Because, once you've been in it for a while, you're like, this is an old story to me, but for a lot of people, it's new and exciting, and they have a lot of questions. So this has been a very lovely conversation, and I've learned so much. It's really interesting to hear about all the things you've been doing at UT Austin, and so thank you so much for coming on the show. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Same here. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm delighted to be supportive of anyone in the field, and I think that we're over the pandemic hump a little bit, and I think there's so much to look forward to. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will link to Sonia over on LinkedIn, of course, UT Austin's global unit as well, so you can see what's going on there. The document you mentioned before that you're getting ready to publish, is that a public document that
Yes,
others?
it'll be public.
Okay, great.
And it'll be the Global Engagement Report for 2020 to 2022.
Wonderful.
And it should be up. Well, since we had the ice storm, we're experiencing a bit of a delay, but it should be up, I think, by February 25th at the latest.
Okay. Yeah. For those keeping score, we are filming this on February 1st. So yes, they're having crazy ice storms down in Texas right now. So thank you for being able to record this today. I really appreciate it. And we will link to everything in the show notes for this over at gatewayinternational.org. And thank you again, Sonia. It's wonderful to meet you. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you. You too.